Hello. The suppression of the monastic houses of England and Wales and the transfer of their property to the Crown during the reign of Henry VIII was carried out to boost the royal coffers. Most of the buildings were sold off through the Court of Augmentations. Some were subsequently demolished, their stone, timber and lead recycled. Others survived, at least in part, converted into private manor houses. William St Lowe, captain of the Yeoman Guard, Member of Parliament for Derbyshire and the third husband of Bess of Hardwick, acquired Woodspring Priory as an investment and leased it out as a working farm. The Priory became part of the Landmark Trust portfolio in 1969 in a joint deal with the National Trust. At the same time, the National Trust bought an adjoining stretch of land along the coast. The site is some 4 miles north of Weston-super-Mare in Somerset. Woodspring Priory was founded around 1210 by William de Courtenay, a grandson of Reginald Fitzurse. Fitzurse was one of the 4 West Country knights who murdered Thomas Becket before the altar of Canterbury Cathedral in 1170. He was probably the prime mover in the affair, the man who struck the first blow. Maud, the daughter of Richard Brito, one of the other knights involved, was also a generous benefactor of Woodspring Priory. It was a house of Augustinian canons, and canons were priests living a communal life of prayer and contemplation combined with active ministry, not separate from the outside world, but part of it. The Augustinians, or Black Canons as they were popularly known from the black cloak they wore, were the largest group of canons, and at Woodspring they were a suborder following the reforms introduced in 1109 by William of Champeaux at the Abbey of Saint Victoire near Paris. They were known as Victorines. Becket was a reluctant Archbishop of Canterbury, persuaded to take on the role of head of the church in England and Wales by Henry II, who used his influence to see his friend appointed. Becket foresaw it would bring them into conflict. He was only ordained as a priest the day before his consecration, the first English-born Archbishop of Canterbury since the Norman conquest. Once appointed, Becket took his role seriously, setting off on a tour of Europe, meeting a range of religious dignitaries and returning with a newfound asceticism and religious zeal. A powerful personality, Becket was determined to establish the independence of the church from the state, which brought him into immediate conflict with King Henry. Woodspring Priory was founded in a spirit of atonement for Becket's murder. A 13th century seal featuring Becket's martyrdom emphasises the Priory's dedication to the Holy Trinity, St Mary and St Thomas Becket, who had spent some time at the Abbey of Saint Victoire near Paris, whose reformed rule the canons of Woodspring followed. Most of the priory building that remains dates to the late 14th and early 15th centuries. This is when a new church in perpendicular Gothic style with fan vaulting was begun, replacing a 13th century predecessor on the north side of a cloister at the centre of the priory complex. Fan vaulting is an architectural feature that developed in England. It's thought to have been first used in what was then Gloucester Abbey, now Gloucester Cathedral. At the same time, a new infirmary was built and a tithe barn, using locally quarried golden grey Dundry stone. The tithe barn is now owned by the National Trust and is still in agricultural use. When the priory was dissolved in 1536, the chancel of the church was demolished and the nave converted into a private house. Fireplaces were added, chimneys were built through the roof and a floor inserted, dividing the nave's space into an upper and lower storey. A difference of opinion over whether the church should be restored as a church or, as the Landmark Trust wished, as the farmhouse it had become delayed restoration. An agreement was eventually reached and Woodspring Priory refurbished as a house to provide holiday accommodation. In addition to the nave, the tower over the crossing still stands with an octagonal stair turret leading to a bell-ringing chamber. The foundations of the chancel and of a lady chapel are visible as earthworks, and the remains of a gatehouse can be seen along with fragments of a boundary wall. The Victorines of Woodspring farmed the surrounding land and reconfigured the landscape by draining areas. There's evidence of the descriptively termed ridge and furrow system of cultivation, the characteristically corrugated appearance achieved by medieval ploughing over several seasons, throwing the soil on one side, creating a ridge, increasing the land surface and its exposure to sunlight for sowing crops, with the furrows in between providing drainage. A series of linked fish ponds are visible as now dry, oval-shaped shallow depressions. And fish, of course, an important dietary item for the canons. A pool that appears after heavy rain probably marks the site of the original spring after which the priory is named, or rather misnamed. Until 1790 it was known as Warspring. Following the Landmark Trust's rescue and restoration, another unusual and historic property has a new lease of life as a holiday let, set in open countryside. The living room and some bedrooms occupy the space that was once the nave of the Priory church. There's also a museum telling the history of the Priory, which is usually open to the public on Mondays and Fridays. Next time, the survival of a typical open hall house gives us an insight into life in a medieval manor. If you've enjoyed this video, hit the like and subscribe buttons and click on the notification bell to be informed when the next video is available, or you can subscribe by clicking on the rose window over my shoulder.